The wars in Syria and Iraq and unrest elsewhere in the Mideast have created a humanitarian crisis, formed fertile ground for Islamic extremist terrorism, and set off debates in the U.S. over what to do. Leaders in Europe are calling the flood of refugees into their countries the worst crisis they've seen since World War II. After that war, the U.S. led an economic recovery effort on Europe's behalf called the Marshall Plan, named for then Secretary of State George Marshall. It was widely considered the most successful foreign policy initiative of last century. You might be surprised to hear today, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has come up with a bold new idea for something very similar to apply to the Mideast. It's a $150 billion Marshall Plan to address today's terrorist reality. The next 10 years.
Brussels Paris attack is coming if we don't get ahead of it. Libya is going to become a completely failed state if we don't do something now. In a year from now, if we don't stop this refugee problem and get a better handle on it, the King of Jordan could be in real trouble.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is a military hawk, but he's suggesting a different solution than more boots on the ground.
I'd like to really push radical Islam where they're the weakest, empowering people, giving young people something to live for, a good job and a good education. That will destroy radical Islam far more effectively than a bomb.
To Graham, the bombed-out photos of Syria with entire cities leveled and ancient art and treasures destroyed are reminiscent of Germany and Japan in ruins after World War II. You're trying to develop sort of a new Marshall Plan.
Yes.
What is the Marshall Plan, the old Marshall Plan first, and what's your idea for the new one?
Two radical countries were defeated in World War II. Germany and Japan had radicalized their populations. We occupied these countries and spent a lot of money developing institutions, re-educating the population, and now we have Germany and Japan as two democracies who have been great allies since World War II. It was a stroke of genius.
A stroke of genius that Graham wants to replicate in the Middle East.
We spent $1.5 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan. What could you do with 10% of that money to build up fragile states and turn around failing states?
Some people might say that trillion we spent in Iraq and Afghanistan is proof as to why we shouldn't dump more money into that region or into that fight.
Well, I think most of it's been, these have been major wars with 100,000 plus troops. If you don't believe we should have gone in after 9/11 in Afghanistan, I disagree with you. I'm glad that we took the Taliban out. I'm glad Saddam Hussein is dead. I'm glad that Gaddafi is dead. Having said that, we're going to have to understand that when the dictator falls and the Taliban are taken down, the hard work begins.
Graham's Marshall Plan 2.0 envisions a German-led global effort to pour upwards of $150 billion worth of humanitarian and economic aid into Middle Eastern countries that are teetering on the edge.
What I want to do is create a new pot of money, low-interest loans, preferential treaty agreements with these fragile states, only if they'll change. We're not going to write checks to people who are just throwing folks in jail they don't like. We're not going to write checks to countries where people who run the government rip off their own populations. Where does the pot of money come from? Because other Republicans might say, and probably are saying, we're broke. Pay now or pay later. Yeah, we are in debt, but we're not too broke to defend ourselves. And here's what I've learned. The military part of it only takes you so far. And you just can't throw money to Afghanistan and Iraq to people who are corrupt. So I'm trying to create a smaller pot of money, giving it to people only if they change their behavior to make sure that we can sustain the gains we've fought so hard to achieve. Use it as leverage. In other words, leverage. You think we've given money in the past but haven't gotten anything. Given money to warlords to try to buy security. We've given money to the Karzai government that was corrupt to the core. Maliki, corrupt to the core. How many times are you going to do this? Working with Bono, the lead singer of U2 and founder of the anti-poverty group The One campaign, Graham wants to identify worthy causes and worthy countries, including, he says, Egypt. Empowering a poor young girl with an education will do more to hurt ISIL and the Taliban than any bomb. And that's where the Bono part comes in. And here's what I would tell the American people. Our ace in the hole is that most people in the region are not buying what ISIL and the Taliban are selling. We just need to help them fight back effectively. And that's what this money's about. Graham and Bono met with Egyptian President Abdel El-Sisi in Cairo. He's taken the fight to ISIL. He's been a good ally to Israel. I think he's somebody we can work with. I think he's got the right attitude about radical Islam.
But Graham admits selling the plan at home will be a challenge.
We are in debt. Our foreign policy is in free fall. We're going to be spending money to defend the nation through our military and through our foreign assistance. I'm trying to come up with a strategy that would spend it wisely and create partners that we can rely upon. Can I sell it in the current environment? I don't know, but I do know this, that when the next attack comes, and if something doesn't change, it's going to come, we need to be ready to engage fully and effectively.
The plight of hundreds of thousands of refugees and their impact as they flee countries around the world continues to be one of the biggest stories of our time. The story and coverage of it have produced many dramatic and compelling images. These are some from Greece and other points of migration across Europe. The New York Times and a mass media firm called Thomson Reuters shared the Pulitzer Prize this year, awarded in the past week, for breaking news photography coverage of the refugee crisis. And still to come on Full Measure, Tuesday is another critical primary day for presidential candidates. We'll take a look at what's at stake and see how the generation that gets no respect is making a big impact in this presidential election.